I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome everybody to Wednesday Night Big Book Study Workshop with the Program of Recovery. How we open this meetings with the Serenity Prayer. And what do we need for a good meeting? God. Grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. You know, we got some new people tonight. We got some people joining us, and people have been following through. So we have, up here we have the worksheets. They're designed to go through the book and to reiterate. When you read it, you'll get certain ideas or certain information. The sheets are designed to help point out what they're trying to get across to you, reader, so you get the information. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to go through the book and kind of hit some highlights. That way when you're reading it alone, you'll kind of know what to look for and the purpose of it. And then we're going to go probably, hopefully, right up to step 11. We're going to go through the whole process and highlight, right? Because what happens is we spend a lot of time focusing on things that we really don't need to focus on. And so what happens is our brains have the ability to shift on us, and we don't know it's shifted. We have the ability to spend a lot of time trying to solve problems that are not really problems. I don't know if anybody has that kind of ability here. We just have that kind of thinking. I was talking to my buddy Eddie today, and he was kind of like, I said, like, we try to save ourselves from ourselves. Anybody have that keen ability? I bought one of those haircut things from Costco, and I thought, how hard can it be to cut hair? And I had my daughter, she was sick, long, beautiful, curly hair, past her shoulders. I thought I'll give her a little trim, right? And I think my best thinking was it doesn't look that hard. Just the same way we look at the steps. It doesn't look that complicated. And so what happens is I set up a little booth, and I said, hi, my name's Pierre, the French hair cutter, and I started cutting her hair. And as I cut it, a part of me went, whoops. And then the other part, I can fix this, right? Instead of stopping and acknowledging maybe I'm out of my league here, I don't know, my brain says, you got this. Anybody got that kind of brain? You got this. And as I started continuously cutting, I was reiterating to the world around me that it's fine, like I got this, things are fine. But inside, a little bit of a panic started to happen. So as my little beautiful girl turned into Rod Stewart, right? And her hair was all stuck up. She had a little mohawk going and stuff like that. And I still was going, well, that looks pretty good. She started crying. She goes, can I have my dad back, please? Anyway, and that's kind of like how we go through the steps, right? Undetected or on our own, we kind of, at the end of it, we kind of go, oh my God, this is not really what we're hoping to anticipate or achieve or the outcome. So if you kind of know the outcome and what you're hoping to achieve, then you could kind of say, maybe I'm off track here. How do I get on track? If I'm not experiencing what the people that put this together are experiencing, then maybe I'm missing something. Because we like to take over. Anybody like to take over from here? I got it. I'll take over from here. You don't need to explain it to me. I've read the instructions off the wall. I've listened at meetings. I know how to do this thing. So when you go to the preface in your book, the first part, they talk about where you find the AA recovery program. And so where would one find the AA recovery program? They talk about being in the first portion. You notice they didn't number it as the first 164 pages, right? What's missing from the first 164 pages? Preface, right? The forewords, the doctor's opinion, and the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. Some really crucial information is missing from that. But somebody heard at a meeting, it's the first 164 pages. It sounds really like, yeah, it was possible if you didn't know the alternative, the information here. So yeah, that makes sense. So at the next meeting you go to, in order to sound like you know what you're talking about, you're going, the program's in the first 164 pages. It doesn't say that anywhere. It's actually in the first portion. And when you go through this with the instruction, you'll find out that the first actual change that they talk about that we get to experience is in the first 88 pages, with the doctor's opinion, the forwards, and the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. By the time you get to page 88, you should have experienced this thing for yourself that these other people are experiencing, and the rest of the book's dedicated to how to practice these principles in all your affairs and carry this message. But if you haven't had that experience, can you carry this message to other alcoholics? So we see that having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, that change has already occurred. Now, what are we going to do with it? That's what they talk about. What are we going to do with this? They talk about carrying this message to other people. So when we go forward to the first edition, they talk about how many people put this together. The purpose of this thing is to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women. So they're kind of making a statement there. This is put together by a large group of people who all agree on 3 pertinent ideas. What's the first thing that they all agree on? What the problem is. What's the second thing they all agree on? What the solution is. And what's the third thing they all agree on is the course of action that brought about this change. So when was the last time you've been to a meeting where everybody agrees on all those 3 things? A lot of, for me, sobriety going on nowadays, right? So everywhere, well, for me is like my God, my recovery, my program, it's like me standing by the ocean saying my ocean, my sunlight, right? What are you doing? I'm going outside to enjoy my sunlight, my ocean. The only thing you can enjoy is your glass of water, right? This is bigger than anything we could ever experience. So we don't know what they mean by seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. They do. So when we go through the doctor's opinion, who's this doctor? Dr. Silkworth. What did he specialize in? Yeah, alcohol and drug addiction. He was the chief physician. So as he goes through here, what are some of the points that he'll be highlighting on? We'll be looking for what they mean by seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. He'll be able to reiterate what they mean by that by his observations on people who are afflicted with this illness back in the town's hospital. So if you kind of go through the first page here, Roman numeral 25, there's some highlights here you can look at later. He kind of describes this thing that was taking place within his treatment facilities with one of the guys that went through there upon his 3rd treatment. He acquired some ideas that he put into practice, and this doctor witnessed this profound change in this individual, which we understand now is Bill Wilson, one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. So he witnessed this profound change as a result of this course of action that was introduced to him. We'll find out by Evie. So he witnessed this thing, the return to health. So he talked about here, we started to go through this, the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. What's the first symptom in alcoholism that he starts describing or talking about? Allergy. The allergy, which consists of what symptom? What symptom does that refer to?
Sickness.
Seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. So what symptom is this referring to? The body. And they talk about these allergic types, right? Well, why are they? What are these allergic types? Because they have a allergy, and that when these types of people put alcohol into their system, what happens to them? They get thirstier. They get a craving, right? They have an abnormal reaction. How many people thought they had a normal reaction? How many people watched people have 1 or 2 and thought they had an abnormal reaction? How many people drank with normal people and thought there's something the matter with them? They have 1 or 2, they get out of control, nauseated, and want to go home feeling. I get a in control, let's get up, let's do something feeling. Anybody have that here? We drink differently than other people. I just, nothing appealing about a couple drinks. Anybody here? How many people like the effect produced by alcohol? Oh, yeah. It's all about the effect, right? How many people like the consequences associated with alcohol? No. So, and he goes on to talk about like that. If we didn't have any consequences, how many people would have came to AA? So we have consequences associated with our drinking. So we think that's the problem, is the consequences. Anybody here? I have a consequence problem, not an alcohol problem. So then you find out why you're always going to have a problem. Why are these types of people always going to have a problem when they drink?
Because they get into trouble.
Well, because they can't control the amounts they drink. If you can't control the amounts you drink, you're going to do stupid stuff. Anybody prone to stupid stuff here?
Yeah.
Anybody ever question themselves in the morning, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And then the other part of you says, I don't know. I'm just getting here myself. No, so we find out that we can't drink with impunity. What does that mean? Without consequence. So what gives us that idea that we won't be able to drink without consequence, with impunity? Because these types have the phenomena of craving. So when they put alcohol into their system, they trigger the phenomenon of craving. If you can't control the amounts you drink, can you control the outcome that comes with drinking?
No.
So the only way not to have consequences is not to drink. How many people found that solution really easy to do? How many people knew that long before they came here, right? And in Bill's story, we see that. So he talks about there's also something else that happens with us, and it's psychological, and we can't see the danger in what we're about to do, that our lives seem the only normal one, and it makes sense for us to take a drink because we're irritable, restless, and discontent. He tries to explain it in the best way he knows how, being the first introduction of this thing. Not comfortable in our own skin. How many people had that, I'm not quite comfortable in my own skin? You can't really put your finger on what it is, but it's the frequency of, I just don't feel right. I don't know what it is. And you try to sort out what it is, and then you have a drink and you feel right. Anybody feel right having a couple drinks? And then after a while, you just don't care. Mm-hmm. Anybody like that here? I don't know if it changes anything, but I just don't care about anything anymore, right? The next and most important thing is when you're drinking is what? The next one. How many people are thinking about the next one before they finish the first one? So now we see why we drink that way is because of the allergy. And so when the doctor talks about in here, they talk about in here men and women drink essentially, that's Roman numeral 28. Right? And before we get into that, he says, how many people have tried to get sober here before coming to AA? How many people know that maybe they had a problem trying to control or regulate or change their environment, change what they drink, change something in order to not have a problem anymore? How many people were successful? That kind of answers itself, right? Because we're here, right? So anybody ever tried frothy emotional appeal to get you to change what you're doing? Anybody ever give you a good talking to? Have you ever given yourself a good talking to? Right? Has either one of those things been effective in stopping you from drinking? So he talks about that these people seem to have some form of illness more than a behavioral problem. There seems to be something fundamentally different than normal people when it comes in regards to alcoholism. And he talks about frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices, that the message that holds these people, keep them together, recreates their life, have to have depth and weight. Right? Has to move past the thinking, has to have depth and weight. You know what depth and weight means? You ever see those big ocean liners? You ever see the size of the anchor? Keeps them depth and weight. That's what they're talking about, right? It has to go to the bottom. It has to stay secure, because left to our own thinking, how many people are kind of get different ideas all the time on different things, and kind of you're going one way one day and you're going going another way, and you're doing this one day and you're apologizing the next day, and you're staying sober for the rest of your life, and then you're apologizing for getting drunk. I mean, it's just, I think anybody got that kind of unmanageability? You're telling people you love them as you're throwing a jar at their head. I mean, that's real love. Anybody, or is it just me? You set up the Christmas tree one day and you're picking it up the next day. The cat's hiding from you. Living the dream. Okay. So they talk about here, this is really interesting because on page Roman numeral 29, the doctor notices something. The characteristic of these people, they seem to keep on drinking in spite of the stuff that happens to them, right? They talk about they're restless, irritable, and discontent unless they can experience a sense of ease and comfort, which by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, where does that take place? Desire. Mind. In your thinking, right? As so many do, the phenomenon of craving develops. When does the craving happen? Before or after you drink? After, right? They pass through a well-known stage of a spree. Anybody need that explained? 30 years doing this study, nobody's ever said it. Can you explain that, please? I think an Al-Anon lady once, but even she understood with her husband, right? These sprees, right? Pass through a well-known stage of a spree, emerging remorseful. Anybody need that explained? With a firm resolution not to drink again. Any firm resolutions here? Through forever. Never doing it again. Anybody do it again? So you're not alone. This has been happening back when he wrote this in 1934. Right? It's been the same problem. So, this is repeated over and over. What does over and over mean? It's going to continue to happen in spite of my understanding, my logic, my consequences, my solemos, my experience with alcoholism, right, or my drinking. It's going to continue to happen. Why is that? Because it's an illness and not a behavioral problem. So he goes on, this is repeated over and over unless this person can experience an entire psychic change. There's very, very little hope of his recovery. So what else would suffice us to find recovery to enable us to stay sober under any and all conditions other than an entire psychic change? How about just surrender? How about acceptance? How about think it through? How about don't do it? Those things, if they worked, right? If we were able to learn from our own consequences, how many people would learn that lesson a long time ago? So it moves it into an illness. If you're doing something that you don't know why you're doing it, and he talks about, they keep doing it in spite of their experience with it. Unless they experience a psychic change or spiritual experience, they'll be doomed to what? Drinking again. So what's the promise of step one?
You're gonna get drunk.
I'm going to get drunk again.
Yeah.
Say if I agree with it 100%, does that change it? Say if I agree with step one 100%, that I agree 100% I'm an alcoholic, does that mean I'm going to be okay now? Does it change anything? Just my understanding of what the problem is, but it doesn't change the problem. Say if I deny it, does it change anything? Doesn't matter whether you accept it or deny it. The outcome's still going to be the same. By accepting or doing this thing, by admitting I have this, then at least you can look at the solution that's being offered. Does that kind of make sense? And he gives two examples of people who were afflicted with this illness, who did this course of action, and both of them recovered. So what's the purpose of Bill's story then? Well, if we just looked at the doctor's opinion, and he gave two case studies of two people who were afflicted with alcoholism. One had grave emotional and mental disorders, and the other one was a real alcoholic, and both of them became sold on the ideas contained in this book, and it created that psychic change that he was talking about, and they were able to recover from an illness that had them baffled. And he gave two examples of people who were afflicted with this illness, did the course of action, and they both recovered from it. So he is endorsing what he said at the beginning of this thing. Say, look I've witnessed this thing. These people were beyond human aid. They did this thing that's beyond my understanding, this course of action, and both of them seem to recover. So Bill would be an expansion of that idea, that story of somebody who's afflicted with alcoholism. So as we go through Bill's story, we see alcoholism starting to take place in his life. So when you get to page 12 and 13, or actually if you kind of back up by 11, 12 and 13, you can kind of go through this in big details. So we see that Bill's been trying to get sober for a while. But he keeps on drinking. And then when he went to treatment, he even found out what the problem was, right? The doctor told him what alcoholism looked like. And what did he think was the answer after he found out what alcoholism was based on the doctor's findings? He talked about the will being amazingly weak when it comes to alcohol, right? And the allergy and all that. He explained alcoholism to Bill. What did Bill thought the answer was after that? How about this one? Self-knowledge. Anybody ever try to stay sober on self-knowledge? Just do step one every day? Doesn't save you from step one. It's self-knowledge. How well did self-knowledge work for Bill? Then he ended up in treatment again, the second time. And what was his state the second time in treatment? Was he in better condition than the first time he ended up in treatment? Was he willing to do anything the second time? Did he accept his lot? Did he admit complete defeat in regards to, did he hit bottom? Did he surrender? Did he have acceptance? Was he willing to do anything to change his life? what he wouldn't give. Alcoholism. So he has all those elements that we have. He has acceptance. He has surrender. He was willing to go to any lengths to change his life. He should be good to go now, right? He leaves treatment. How long? What kept him sober? Fear. How many people tried to get sober on fear here? How well did that work? You forget. So Bill forgot, and what did he? So when he relapsed again, why did he relapse? He knew exactly why he relapsed this time, because he understood alcoholism based on the doctor's explanation of it. So why did he relapse the second time, leaving treatment?
He hadn't had the psychic shift yet.
Well, yeah, but he kind of knew that. Well, he kind of didn't know that, but he kind of talked specifically why he relapsed. Fear kept him sober, then the insidious insanity. He knew why he relapsed, because of the insanity. So most people, when they relapse, they tie an excuse to relapse. He knew why he's relapsing now, because he suffers from an illness and he suffers from the insidious insanity. Does that kind of make sense? So he talks about that. If you kind of look at way back on page 8, kind of a couple of you looked at me, page 8. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And that goes into the second symptom of alcoholism that's described more later on as the malady that centers in a mind, an unexplainable event. That's why they don't use a malady could be used a lot of different ways. Is something is really hard to put your finger on what they mean by. A malady can mean a lot of different things and used in a lot of different ways, right? Not specific like a disease, illness, that's specific and treatable, right? So they use the word malady. So here they talk, he knows why. And so his friend shows up, who's sober for a little while, and then he introduces him to a course of action that he did. And then he goes to treatment for the third time based on the information that his friend was talking about. So now he did step 1, he did step 2, and he did step 3, sitting at the kitchen table doing what? Drinking. So what does step 1, 2, and 3 change in a person's life? Nothing. But it makes you feel good. How many people are hoping steps 1, 2, and 3 would change you sufficient enough to recover, sufficient enough that you didn't have to do the rest of the steps? Because it's all about not doing the rest of the steps. If I could have the change without doing the work, then boy, it saves me from me, right? How many people like the idea of being able to get this by doing nothing? Come on, let's be honest. I went to 2 meetings, the miracle happened. Can I share? No. What would you be sharing about? Anyways, I went to the airport and still going nowhere. Okay. So what's the difference the third time going to treatment? He had somebody taking him through a course of action that had the practical experience and it changed as the result of that action. So he's taking Bill through the same course of action. That's why sponsorship, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. If you're hanging around with somebody who's just staying sober and haven't had this experience, can they carry this message to you? If you're just going to meetings trying to get sober, is this message being endorsed or sufficient enough to stop you from relapsing? Right? Meetings are like sitting at the airport. Unless you have a ticket to go somewhere, you're sitting at the airport. How many days in a row can you sit at the airport and really enjoy yourself? After 90 days, if you don't got a flight plan, you're going to be a little, aren't you? Been here 90 days now. Everybody's coming and going somewhere. Ain't nothing happening for me. Well, did you talk to a travel agent? No. You got an itinerary? No. You got a flight plan? No. Are you happy? What makes you say that? Right? Wouldn't you be nuts sitting at the airport for after 90 days? You wouldn't even be looking out the window at the planes anymore, would you? I don't want to hear where you're coming from. Just got back from Paris. Good for you. How many people got like that in AA? Just when you get here, you're so happy that you're here for everybody, or some of us. Most of us think it's a jail sentence coming in AA. How many people thought they got sentenced? I got a good AA. The sentence has begun. Whoa, the drama. And then after a while, you find it's the best thing that ever happened to you. You hear people are happy here, they're contented, they have a life beyond anything they could ever imagine. Their families are restored or not restored, but either way, they find happiness, contentment, and joy, right? Their lives are not circumstantial based on everything around them anymore. They found freedom from alcoholism. That's pretty cool when you think about that, right? They find to make easy going out of life. When we get here, a lot of us are heavy. Life is heavy when we get here. Like we're dragging a huge Smith right of the past and our inability to shake it. Anybody? Like our past defines us. We are our story, and we don't know anything else other than our story. And we're saying, and that was kind of like Bill. But when Bill went through this, he started having a new story. That's the remarkable part, in that when he kind of went through and he started having difficulties, he was able to apply this solution to it that created a change, right? And then unless you have this recipe, you're still stuck with you. And if it's not an internal recipe that you could get access to through experience, then your brain will actually talk you into believing something that isn't true, right? But Bill, even though his brain was still going south, he was able to reel it in by applying these principles to create a change sufficient enough that he was able to go past where he was able to go before in his life. Like a year and a half, his friends were skeptical. He was still plagued with depression, right? A few times he was tempted to drink, but he was able to apply this solution. And here we are, 2019, with the same solution, right? So then we get into there is a solution. So in Bill's story, it's the same like how it works. It talks about what we used to be like, not what it was like. So we see in Bill's story his struggle with alcoholism, don't we? Isn't it clear? His inability to get sober. We see what happened, what they talk about, and how it works. What happened part isn't the treatment centers, isn't his last drunk, isn't the consequences. The what happened part is his experience going through this process with Ebby. My friend promised when these things were done, I'd have the elements of a way of living that answered all my problems, not just my alcoholism, all my problems, right? He was grounded in something other than himself, right? And then we seen what he was like after this psychic change or spiritual experience. So we seen what he was like, what happened, and what he's like now or then, right? So the what happened part is the course of action. If you haven't done the course of action to create this change, as Bill went through, and the first 100 men and women went through, and since thousands went through, your story is what mine was for the first 11 years, and what it used to be like, what it's still like, and what it continues to be like, right? A lot of us don't experience recovery, we experience abstinence, right? Because once you experience recovery, you don't need this explained to you anymore. But when you experience abstinence, it's still very confusing, this thing that we're getting. When you move, you don't know you're moving away from it because you haven't experienced it. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like, anybody remember the first time they felt the magic in a drink? How many people remember that euphoric kind of, I found the answer to all my problems. All the promises came true. You knew a new freedom, new happiness. You didn't regret the past nor wish to shut the door. And you've seen how your experience can meet everybody around you. Right? Anybody? Right? So now, you know what it feels like to have that experience. So if somebody offered you a glass of water, would you know the difference between the two of them? But if you haven't experienced that elusive feeling that we get from alcohol, if you've never experienced that, and I offered you a Coke, not Coke, but I mean Coke, gotta be specific with this group, a ginger ale or lemon juice, and you drank all these different things, you think, oh, is this it? Is this it? Is this it? Because you haven't had this experience, right? But once you experience alcohol, every time you get near it, you know it. You know your nostrils flare a bit, and you kind of get a little. Anybody? Like we could smell them open a bottle 2 rooms down. It's like, what was that sound? The cork going. That's freedom. No, sorry. Anyway, and we're like that. We just different, and that's kind of like the spiritual experience. Once you experience it, it's kind of like no explanation is necessary after that, right? And then when you move away from it, you go, something ain't right. I'm just not feeling right. You do the application of these principles to get back in line. So here, there is a solution. They talk about a lot of different things, right? The captain's table and the third section, we call it the wine and cheese, the craft dinner section. A lot of different people come to AA. But what keeps us all together isn't where we come from, is that we had a common problem. But that's not what holds us together. What we have is a common solution. They talk about on page 17 here, the tremendous fact for every one of us that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out which we can absolutely agree. So they're talking, it's not for me. You hear a lot of people making this, well, for me. It's not for you, it's for us. If you come here looking for a solution, we're going to offer you our solution. It's not your solution, it's our solution. You get to practice it on a daily basis. You get to experience it with us, but it's not yours. God, as I understand, well, no, you need to understand how we understand it first to have your own conception of what we're talking about. But the same thing is the solution as we understand it. It's generic. We all have the same understanding what the solution is. It's not my own understanding, your understanding. It's our understanding. The basis of it is the same. So the problem is from whose idea? Ours or theirs? How many people would have came up with that idea of the problem? No. How many people sat with their buddies in the bar and says, oh, what's going on with you? Oh, don't leave them alone. It looks like they're suffering from the phenomenon of craving. They can't control and enjoy their drinking. How many people said that at the bar when you were there? Oh, watch him. He'll steal the drinks. He has the phenomenon of craving. Think he suffers from alcoholism. I've never had, hey, Tony, I heard you were quitting. What are you doing back here? Oh, no, he suffers from a malady, a subtle form of insanity that only a spiritual experience can conquer. So he'll be back again next week after making a solemn oath. My friends didn't tell me that. Hey, Tony, try a bit of more methamphetamine. But never, anyways, moving on. A way we can absolutely agree. So then they talk about here on page 18. It tells us what this book is about, right? We hope this volume will inform and comfort those who are or may be afflicted. So it's going to explain alcoholism based on their understanding from the doctor's findings. And then on page 19, they reiterated that we have continuous published anonymous volumes setting forth the problem as we see it, as who sees it, as they see it. So I didn't understand what they're talking about. Step 2 is the same thing. I need to understand what they're talking about. Step 2 is not as I understand it. It's as they understand it through their experience that they found a solution that was passed on to them and passed on through the generations, that they have a common solution that when applied to their life, they could have the same experience as Ebby did, Bill did, Bob did, the first 100 men and women did, and since thousands of people did. But in order to have that experience, do I need to understand exactly what they're talking about? Yeah. I need to understand what they're talking about, because if I don't understand what they're talking about, how will I know if I'm experiencing that? Because I could create an elusive feeling. I could think about something long enough to where I actually think it's true. I'm a little not quite right in the old thinking department. I've thought about spending the lottery many a times what it felt like to be a millionaire. I don't even have a wedding ticket. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Anybody?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Anybody have that kind of not quite right feeling? So anyways, I call it evangelical sobriety. Right? Not based on anything, but boy, it makes me feel good. Okay. So then they start breaking down. So when we get to page, let's go to alcoholism, more about alcoholism. So they cover a lot of information. By the time we get to more about alcoholism, they're going to break down certain ideas here. There's only, how many symptoms are there in alcoholism? 2. And they talk about most of us have been unwilling to admit we're real alcoholics. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different than his fellows. No person likes to think they're bodily and mentally different than their fellows. So they're going to start talking on more about alcoholism. So they're going this chapter in the first, from page 30 to 33, they talk about the allergy, right? And how we fully have to understand the allergy component to alcoholism. Because if you don't understand this, it doesn't matter what you do after that. You got to understand why I need a psychic change or spiritual experience. Because if I can't safely drink, I need to concede that to my innermost self. If I think I can safely drink one day, will I need to do this work? Have I admitted to be an alcoholic? No. If I think I could safely drink one day, I haven't done step one. If I've done step one, I've smashed the idea that I can never safely drink whatsoever in any form whatsoever because I'm allergic to it. That means when I put it into my system, I'll trigger the phenomenon of craving, and there will be consequences associated with my drinking or being AA, with my drinking, because I can't control the amounts I take. I was talking about that today. One of my last drunks, I came to going down the road somewhere in Vancouver driving a car. I heard this person saying, hey, why don't you let this girl drive? I don't even know where they came from. You ever see that commercial where they put the beers in front of you? They got 3 beers, and you got to add 2 more beers. That's how drunk I came to driving my car. Didn't even know where I was, who these people were. Now, next thing I know, I'm eating soup somewhere. That's pretty hammered. Right? Why did I get that? Because I took the first drink. Right? Why did I take the first drink again? And they talk about that from page 33 to 44. So they spend 43. Sorry, they spend 11 pages. 11 pages describing the second symptom in alcoholism as the least understood symptom in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Is the second symptom in alcoholism. The least talked about in AA. And where it really describes, you could look at it later, is page 37. They talk about this thing that centers in our mind, as described on page 23, is where they get this idea of it being a malady, and that the main problem of the alcoholic centers in their mind. They call it a malady. It's really hard to detect and it's really hard to explain, but this is what it looks like for those who have it. Right? They're unable to keep themselves sober at certain times. That means 90% of the time or 98% of the time, I could keep myself sober based on self-knowledge. And I could go months or years given good reason. Then suddenly something happens in my mind where I think it's a good idea to take a drink. That's alcoholism. Right? And they describe that on page 37 as a phenomena. An unexplainable event. How do you explain an unexplainable event? They can't. So they said, this is what it looks like for those who suffer from it. Right? As I sat and had lunch, I ordered a milk and a sandwich. Suddenly, thought crossed my mind, it'd be a good idea to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk. As observers, we think that's crazy. You just admitted the page before that you had everything to lose, that, right? And there you are, all lit up again. So once you put the ounce of whiskey in the milk, then what happened? Triggered the allergy and was off. So then you'd think, if you're a keen intellectual like we are, we think, oh, the guy had problems. He was a little irritable, restless. Look at his life. The guy's had some out and dealt with issues. That's why he drank again. And they go, we know you think like that, so we're going to tell you about the other guy that didn't have a care in the world. This guy's doing really good. Now, the cloud on the horizon, you think he's doing good? If he did a self-check-in and say, hey, do you think you'll be drinking an hour from now? There'd be no way. I'm never drinking again. Right? As he dressed, the thought came to mind, and as he crossed, a couple highballers would be nice, and going back to the puzzle factory. Right? He took a drink, nothing more, and then that was it. He was off on a bender. So, what do they call this kind of thinking? Plain insanity. They call it phenomena, an unexplainable event on page 37. And then they close on page 43, 11 pages describing this problem. 11 pages. There's only one other area in the book where they spend almost 11 pages trying to explain something to us that we don't pay attention to. That's we agnostics. They spend a whole chapter trying to explain the basis of our solution to people who are not paying attention. Because what we are, we look for the information that we think it says, and we go with that. No further explanation is necessary. I just need something to confirm my thinking. Like somebody said along the way, oh, is God as I understood him? So newcomers are coming in, oh, is God as I understand him? I'm making a list of God that's personal to them, this kind, loving, and they make this Santa Claus list of what God is, and it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But they don't need to investigate that anymore because I need to discover the solution as I understand it. Where does it say it's the solution as I understand it? Doesn't. But if I bypass step 2 and the process in the book and I go right to my understanding, will I need to investigate anything further? No, because a lot of times we go. So when we go through this thing, at page 43, they talk about here, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he or any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from, what's that big word? Higher power. So what they're saying is, it's coming again. Whatever got you loaded the last time, it's coming again. And the only thing that's going to save you from that fate is your relationship with a power greater than yourself. And this is where people say, I believe in God. I believe in this thing. I have this thing. I go to church. I do this. Well, they gave an example of that church member, right? And it says that's not what they mean, or it doesn't spell the necessary experience to save you from yourself. So we agnostics talk about here about the experience that they're talking about, right? So as they start going through here, they say lack of power, that was our dilemma. On page 43, after we self-diagnosed on page 44, we self-diagnosed ourselves. We see that we need to have this psychic change or spiritual experience because we know what our fate is. Page 45, they say, well, lack of power is our dilemma. Where and how am I to find this power? That's the question. Where am I to find this power that's going to save me from me? Did it say make up your own ideas? Why don't we go with your idea? Does it say that? It may sound, I don't mean to be like sarcastic, yes I do. But I mean, because this is where my biggest downfall was I started going with my own thinking based on what I was hearing in the fellowship. So I bypassed this whole chapter. I spent 11 years in the know. You got to remember that, 11 years. I'm in church, I choir, I did Baptist, I did Nazarene, I did Roman. I did all these at different times in my sobriety, and I stayed sober for different periods of time. Then I got loaded again. I mean, I was in a church choir one time, and I got loaded. Of course, I was out of the choir, but I mean, so lack of power. I don't know what they mean by that. As they go through here, they start explaining what they mean. Lack of power to create this change, psychic change, or spiritual experience. As I go through here, they start giving me big ideas what this stuff means. Not little ideas, big ideas. Like the Wright brothers. They're talking about flight back then when there was no flight happening. That's not a little idea. That's a big idea of the possibility. Walking on the moon. Big idea, right? Isn't it? Psychic change. Big idea. They're big ideas. They're not little ideas. They're not ideas that I would have come up with in a conversation. So if you kind of look at that in today's language, you're talking about living on Mars. You're talking about living, like you're talking about big ideas. Like it's pretty huge. Like beyond our capability to understand that. Like imagine back then, flight, when they were talking about flying and people sitting in these aircrafts and going through the air on them. Most people think you're nuts. Remember, they used to put people to death who thought the earth was round. They thought if you went too far, you'd fall off the edge of it. Like our thinking has evolved more in the last 100 years than it has our whole. So when they're talking in this chapter, they're talking about some pretty big ideas. Men on the moon, is that not a big idea? Psychic change, is that not a big idea? To obtain this thing, a change sufficient enough to bring about recovery from an illness, that's a big idea. So then when we get to page 54, they're trying to get you to see what they're talking about. Like, we've always been possessed by this power or this entity, this human marvel called this the spirit, this connection. They're talking on page 55. They're talking about actually we're fooling ourselves, for deep down every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. So when they're talking about, well, what's this fundamental idea? They're talking about this frequency, this power, this entity, this thing that talks to you and gives you comfort, this thing that's always been there. at different times when in your darkest moments, that comforting voice that sent you to get some help or phone somebody? Anybody ever have that? That's what, anybody ever think about somebody and then they phone you? Kind of weird, right? How you, it's like that connection's something there. Anybody ever had some really dark moments and then been given a bit of hope or a bit of something, and it kind of changes your whole perspective? Anybody ever been crippled by fear here, an impending calamity, where you're just crippled by your own sense of being, and then something shifts where you're able to move past that point? You notice there's something inside of you that says, hey, it gives you that extra curve. So it says, oh, that's what you mean. And it's something within inside of you. I got that. That's huge. It bypasses your thinking, your reasoning. It bypasses your instinct mode. And that's what they talk about on 54, is that we've been governed by this stuff our whole life, but it's more instinct-based, and the more it leads to our problems and our focus on self. And it's something at a subconscious level that's dictating how we think, but we can't change on our own. So the book says, well, we're going to change you from the inside out instead of trying to change you from the outside in. By the time we get a thought or an idea, it's already established. If you're trying to sort out, it's like trying to fix a burnt out light bulb. The problem's already happened. You got to get a new light bulb in order to have a new experience. Does that kind of make sense? And that's what they're saying here. We're going to make it with this new technology instead of using the old light. We're going to use new light. It's kind of like that. We're going to change the whole experience for you. So when we go through this thing, they talk about how it works. And then when we get to page 60 to 63, they're going to say we are now at step 3. They're going to explain what they mean by step 3. And what we're going to apply these spiritual principles to. Because we don't apply these spiritual principles to alcoholism. We don't work on our alcoholism. That's like saying, I got ammonia. What are you doing? I'm working on my ammonia. You what? Yeah, put my feet in the icebox for a while. You know, like you treat with the underlying problem. You don't treat the symptoms. Anybody ever have a toothache here? You ever take aspirin to get rid of the pain and you think, oh, the toothache's gone? The toothache's still there. What you're dealing with is the symptoms. That's what most of us do. We deal with the symptoms instead of the problem. So here they're saying you have the human dilemma, which is not just for alcohol. It's the human dilemma. We're an extreme example of these things. We're going to apply these principles or these ideas to these problems, and it's going to rectify, it's going to correct them. It's going to eliminate them. We won't have the same thinking going into this thing as we do coming out of it. Right? So on page 63, it's an idea that they talk about. At the top of the page, they talk about their experience having gone through this. The third step prayer is an idea that could be accomplished or achieved through going through this course of action. I can't achieve it here. It's an idea. What confirms step 3 prayer here is step 11. By the time I get to step 11, I've formulated and experienced everything they're talking about in step 3. It's a summary of the whole course of action. If it was achievable in step 3, would I need to do the rest of the work? Right? And so they talk about as they go through, it's an idea, as long as we express the idea. Right? And then what confirms the idea is we start on step 4. On page 64, they talk about we had to get down to cause and conditions. Alcohol was but a symptom, so we had to get down to what was blocking us. Blocking us from what? Well, or the power, God, source, whatever you want to call it, but the underlying thing is lack of power is our dilemma. So we had to get access to power, right? Creative intelligence, spirit of the universe, whatever you want to call it is your business. But we all understand what we're trying to do here. It's like if I held up my cell phone, we all have the same language. Do you have any bars? You know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not connected to nothing. I've got no reception. If I went like this with my phone and I was given the indication of a plug-in, you would know exactly what I didn't have to tell you. Know that's a common language. We all understand, no matter what country you go to, and I held up a plug and I was going like this, pushing it in the air, you'd point me to an outlet. That's like step 2. It's the same kind of thing, right? This getting access to this power. So the first thing we learn is on page 64 is that we need to learn a new recipe or a new way of looking at things or a new way of processing things. That's what the second paragraph's about. Then they talk about, we're going to look at some of the common manifestations to what our problem is, the symptoms of an underlying problem. Then they talk about what we have as a spiritual malady, right? And the first symptom of that is resentment. From resentment forms all spiritual disease. That's the abscess on the problem. It's like when you have a problem with your tooth, the first symptom is the pain. If you ignore it, then it develops an abscess, right? Is that the first problem or the second? Or is that a symptom of the underlying problem? It's a symptom, right? Because you didn't deal with the first symptom, they developed the second symptom. So resentment is the first symptom, and then the second symptom, from it stems all forms of spiritual disease. So when we deal with the resentment, that takes care of the abscess, and then we can take care of the main problem is straightening out the filling, or whatever you want to call it. Once you take care of the filling, then you maintain it, right? So the first part of this thing is mastering resentment. By the time we get to page 66, we learned how to master resentment. That's the part of the recipe, is to reallocate our energy that was associated to other things. We see the truth in it, where it stems from, and how it's poisoning us. We change the story. Where does the story get changed? Outside of ourselves or inside of ourselves? Within. That's where the story changes. Most of us are stuck to our story. That was my biggest, I couldn't get past my story. So as I went through the resentment part, I started getting separation from the emotions attached to that. And the second part was the people I was attached to on page 67. I had to get detached from them also. And then on page 68, they talk about fear. And by now I'm learning a recipe. The recipe is how to assess, reallocate, and redirect. Assess that there's a problem. Pray to reallocate, take my power and redirect it in a new direction. And once we commence to outgrow fear. From 69 to 70, talks about reformulating my ideas around around relationships and sex. Reallocate all my information, my attachments, the shame, guilt, redefining all that to come up with my new idea how I want to conduct my life, or what my life looked like in my relationships. And then the harms that are associated with the people gone past. The fifth step's about, on page into action, it talks about redeveloping my connection with a power greater than myself. This is what it's about. It's not reconnecting my relationship with me. It's about reconnecting with power source that's going to redefine my life. As I go through 6 and 7, step 6 has to do with my past and the things I still hang on to. This is my personal thing based on what I read. It's not about my defects of character. My defects of character are associated with my spiritual condition. If my spiritual condition's intact, then I don't suffer from an instinct-based life, and I don't respond with selfish, inconsiderate, dishonest, trying to secure something. So what causes me my problem is my association, my attachment to my past. My resentments, my harms, my fears, the things I still carry. Any carriers here? Would you say those things are causing you problems? In order to be free, I need to be free of those things. 90% of those will dissipate when you do your fifth step. So then, as they go through here, it goes into step 7, which indicates again is, as they go from here to do thy bidding, we have completed step 7. That means I trust God with my character defects that happen in the moment, based on my spiritual condition. What I'm praying for in 6 and 7 is willingness to let go of the things that I'm still attached to. And in step 7, that I'm reconfirming step 3, that I'm going to trust God with my life, good and bad. That I pray that you take away every single defect of character that stands in the way of my usefulness. In this moment, defect of character would be associated with selfish, inconsiderate, dishonest in the moment, associated with one of my instincts based on self. But if I'm more spiritually fit, will I be suffering from those instincts? Will I be spiritually based or instinct based? When I'm instinct based, that's what my fourth step looks like, right? I get to see what I look like on a non-spiritual basis and the havoc it creates, right? Anybody? The fifth step confirms that. And 6 says I need to be free of this thing if I'm going to be truly free. Step 7 says I need to reconfirm who I'm going to trust to guide me through the rest of my life from here forward. I'm reconfirming step 3. Who's in charge of my destiny and where am I going? Who am I trusting? In step 4, it teaches me that I play the role he assigns. When does that happen? Tomorrow or today? If I'm here today and in the moment, how free do I need to be present? Very free. That's the goal. How do I get free? How do I detach from my story? How do I create the new story of Alcoholics Anonymous? How do I become a part of the miracle that's available to me? Right? The first thing I need to shift from self, but I don't have the power to do that. So as we go through, it talks about on the bottom here, on page 76, now I'm going to go out and clean up the wreckage that I've created based by trying to live on self. Again, those things, those resentments, those harms, and my conduct, I'm going to go make amends for this to those people. And some of those amends are going to be really hard to do because I'm still stuck to the story. I need to change the story if I'm going to be free enough to go correct the stuff outside of me. But the first place it needs to be corrected is where? Inside. Am I willing to correct the story? Am I willing to look at this story in a new way that I can be free from it? If I can't change it from the inside through a new way of looking at it, then I'm always going to be attached to it. So step 8 and 9 talk about all these different approaches. Step 10 talk about by the time we get to this phase, we've entered the world of the spirit. That means I'm connected to something greater than me. You ever see a house built that's not connected to the power grid? You see everything's connected there, but there's no power running to it. Once it gets connected, it changes the whole element of the house. Anybody ever live in a place with the hydro cut off? You have everything there, but you can't utilize everything. That's like our life. You just don't have the needed power to live at its fullest potential. But once it gets reconnected, then you can see how everything gets utilized. Our next function is to see how I can utilize this to live in comfort and help those around me. Does that kind of make sense? As you felt new power flow in, as you get to enjoy the microwave, the neighbors, the whatever, barbecues, hockey games, big screen TV, it's all as a result of that one connection to source. Right? And then that's connected to something else. And that's connected to something else. And then we see that this whole power grid, it comes from one source, which is pretty wild. And that source is connected to something. So it's the only limitation to it is the way we look at it. Right? And so when we looked at step 11 deals with a 365-day clock or 24-hour clock. In order to live in today, you need to be free of yesterday and what the fear of tomorrow may bring. So in order to live free in today, you need to be connected to source. If you're connected to source, then the step 3 promises are starting to come true. You'll know new freedom and new happiness, right? Which is also the promises. But in step 3, if you look at the contract on page 63, if we performed his work well, what's performing his work well is practicing these principles that we stay connected, that we don't become instinct-based. So once I've experienced this thing that they're talking about, this life force or power, I know what it looks like now to be in a place with power. Will I know what it looks like when it's disconnected from power? Will I know what it looks like when it's disconnected from power? 100% I'll know. And I'll know how to fix it. Either go downstairs or go to the light switch, hit the light switch, or go downstairs, turn the power on, or phone the electric company and pay your bill. That's what step 11 is paying your bill on a daily basis. We get a daily reprieve. And so when you move away from that, you say, there's something ain't quite right here. And it starts with a frequency inside of you. I don't know what it is, but it's just a, I don't know how to explain it. Anybody got that? That means I'm becoming instinctual based. And the more instinctual based I become, the more problems I start having. The more I start worrying, the more I start reliving, refeeling, reconducting, the more I start worrying about stuff that ain't happening. I'm everywhere but in the moment. I'm thinking about things that are not even happening. Step 11 says, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Where are your feet? Where's the connection? Everything's okay right now. What can you do about your situation now? If there's nothing you can do about it, do the serenity prayer, do a prayer, and leave it alone. If there's something you can do about it right now, then ask for the right thought or action to take care of it now. But being free is what this is about. So how many people read Step 11 last week? Nobody. Good. This week, read Step 11, and we're going to go through the mechanics of it and see why it's connected to all the steps and how to get rearrange the wiring within our house to have a new experience from all the shorting that's been going on. Anybody got some wires that are short-circuiting in their brain? Right on. Woo! So, let's close with the serenity prayer. We could get some help cleaning up. It would be great. Read from page 85 to 88. And then we're really going to hammer home how to incorporate this stuff next week. What makes this all possible? God. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right on. Got the worksheets and everything up here.